Hey everybody, welcome back to the Financial Freedom Show. My name is Rob Berger, and this is another live Q&A. We're going to talk, to begin with, about investing in a taxable account because it's come up a lot. I think after the target date retirement fund fiasco with Vanguard and taxes. And so I'm just going to share to start with how I handle that. Sometimes I handle it well. I've made my share of mistakes. I see a lot of folks already in the chat, so if you could just give me a thumbs up, you can hear me. See me, I didn't even comb my hair. I guess I look all right. Does it really matter? Eventually, it just doesn't matter. But yeah, I would appreciate a thumbs up. And so I'm going to dive into the taxable account issue. And there's an aspect to this, and thanks, Kim, for the thumbs up, and VJ, and Marv, and others. So the first thing, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but is we have to think about taxes. That's sort of the big issue. That's one issue. And then we have to think about how does the taxable account, how do we deal with it in relation to all our retirement accounts? If we do it all, or do we just treat it totally separate? So there's sort of two issues. On the tax side, it used to be, back in the old days, I just thought, well, I just want a tax efficient fund. And for me, Vanguard mutual funds, and I still honestly do believe that the right Vanguard mutual funds are probably pretty tax efficient, even though the whole target date retirement fund issue makes me a little less certain of that. But let me just show you what I mean. What do I mean when I say tax efficient? Generally, I look to the distributions. And we've looked at this in recent videos, but maybe you haven't seen them. I'll show it to you briefly. By the way, I will include timestamps below the video, probably tomorrow morning. It's probably when they'll get up there, tomorrow by noon. So if you're listening to this, like shortly after the live stream is over and you think, I'd rather wait till timestamps, yeah, come back tomorrow. All right, so let's see here. Here's Morningstar. I was actually looking at the Schwab. It's an ETF. So let's actually look at, we'll look at a mutual fund. And this is just Vanguard's total stock market index fund. This is a fund that I own today in a taxable account, actually. So this is actually a perfect example. And so the first thing we can just do is go to performance, and then we have to click distributions. We can get the same data at Vanguard, by the way, but I like the way Morningstar presents it. So the income would be either dividends for stocks or interest for bonds. In this case, it's a stock index fund. So these are dividends. So here's the thing to keep in mind. These numbers, what is that, 41 cents? Well, first of all, you've got to recognize that in 2021, there were 4 dividend payments. And that's pretty common. They pay out quarterly. At least in my experience, most funds do. And this, by the way, would be true. We can look at, in fact, let's do that. Let's compare this to the ETF version. So the first thing to keep in mind is, you see, we'll just look at December. You see it's 85 cents, 86 cents. And we look here, and this was 41 or 42 cents. We think, well, wait a minute. The ETF paid out more. Well, no, you can't think of this in absolute terms. You've got to think of it as a percentage of the NAV, right? So whatever, 85 cents divided into 243 bucks. And I don't know what that is, but it's not a lot. And here, it's roughly half, right? 41, maybe exactly half, not quite. It's half the distribution, but it's also roughly half the NAV. So as a percentage, which is what we're really interested in, they're going to be the same. I mean, if we did the math, maybe they're identical. I don't know. Close enough. So you've got that, and then you've got capital gains. We've got ST, which is short term, so that would be typically taxed as ordinary income. And long-term, typically, you get taxed as well. Long-term capital gains, usually a better rate, certainly at the federal level anyway. And you can see it's zeros all the way down. Well, this is just through 2019 here. But if we go to the graphic, we can see all the way back to 2017. You see there's income, and that sums it up for the whole year, $1.14. But there's no short-term capital gains, long-term capital gains, right? It's all green income. And that's the mutual fund. And of course, the same thing with the ETF. With the ETF, you expect it to. The way ETFs are run, they can do in-kind exchanges, and I'll be the first to acknowledge I don't know the mechanics behind how it's run. I know the concepts behind it. I've never run an ETF. I'm sorry. It's just, it's a different YouTube channel. Anyway, but Vanguard figured out how to do it even for mutual funds. My understanding is they treat their ETFs as almost like a share class of the fund. But again, how they do it, how the sausage is made, who cares? ETFs, no capital gains. Vanguard, the mutual fund version, no capital gains. Now, the thing that you have to keep in mind is that you can't take for granted that this is going to be true for all index funds, because it's not. And in fact, if you go over to Schwab, let's see here. Is there a Schwab S&P 500? Let me see if I can find, I don't know. I just don't know what the ticker is. Schwab S&P 500 mutual fund is what I want. SWPPX. Let's check that out. SWPPX. Put it back on the screen for you. So this is a Schwab, same fund, right? It's Schwab, not Vanguard, S&P 500 index fund. But if we go to performance and we click on distributions, you look at this, long-term capital gains. In fact, let's see, they didn't have any last year. In fact, you can see down here better because the blue is the dreaded capital gains. It wasn't huge. Again, we got to compare roughly 7 cents to the 72 buck NAV. But I mean, still, I'd rather have my distributions be all green, no blue, right? Looking at Morningstar. So you can't take for granted that an index mutual fund is not going to distribute capital gains. Now, it's interesting. I've read that whatever Vanguard did to figure this out, they patented it, and that seems odd to me that you could do that. But what do I know? It expires, so patents expire, right? It expires apparently next year. So I don't know if following that, all of the index mutual funds will do whatever Vanguard does and not distribute capital gains. I don't know. I suppose a safe bet is just to buy the ETF version. Now, if you've watched a lot of my videos, way back when I said I prefer mutual fund version, which is true. I don't have to worry about premiums and discounts. I'm always at the NAV. I don't care about trading throughout the day. And it was always Vanguard funds with no capital gains. But in light of what's happened, I'm sort of reevaluating that. So the first part of investing in a taxable account is, I think, getting funds that don't distribute any capital gains. And the yield, I'm typically going for sort of a market, just trying to mirror the market. So, that's what, 1 to 2% on yield. Let's just call it that. Maybe a little higher for some international or I don't know, small cap, probably not. I don't know. We'll call it 1 to 2% in dividends. And I'm okay with that. And so that was my approach. And that's what I did in our taxable account. Now, one of the things I've come to appreciate is that it's not enough to buy a tax-efficient fund. You really, in an ideal world, you want a fund that you can hold forever or hold until you need to take the money out to spend it, let's say, in retirement. If you're buying something that you think, you might hold for 2 to 5 years, not unlike maybe buying a stock. Maybe you're going to buy a sector ETF or whatever. And I've talked about that. Small caps have decent valuations, I think. Emerging markets have decent valuations. That's certainly a way to go, and you can make money, but you have to recognize you're either going to have to hold it forever, or if you sell it, you're going to pay taxes on the capital gains. Again, good problem to have, right? But from a long-term perspective, I'd just as soon hold off on paying any capital gains until I actually want to spend the money, say in retirement, rather than because I want to change my investments. That's what I'm trying to avoid, whether it's because I invested, say, in a sector ETF and now it's at a valuation where I think I should sell it, or I need to rebalance, right? And so when I think of tax-efficient investing, I don't just think of a tax-efficient fund, ETF, what have you, but something that I think I can hold indefinitely, not something I'm going to need to trade out of at some point. Now, that gets back to rebalancing. And the mistake I made, I see all the questions, by the way. I'm going to get to your questions. I'll speed this along. the mistake I made when I had some money to invest in a taxable account 4 years ago was I put all of our US stock allocation in the taxable account. Again, from a VTSAX perspective, very tax efficient. But then when it came time to rebalance, I didn't have any of that exposure in retirement accounts that I could sell and, let's say, buy bonds, for example, without triggering taxes. So I mentioned in a stream last week that maybe to deal with that issue, I might get rid of our REITs, which I think is a viable alternative. There are a lot of viable alternatives. I could maybe decide not to rebalance. That was Jack Bogle's view. It's an option, right? I could say, well, since I'm not spending the dividends and interest, I'll just use that to buy into what I need to and slowly rebalance, maybe along with some contributions. It might take me a while, certainly an option. Changing your asset allocation. In my case, I was going to get rid of my REIT fund. I'd still have REITs in my total stock market fund, so I wasn't getting out of REITs altogether. But then it hit me about a year ago. I mentioned I invested in some bank stocks. Some of those investments were actually in retirement accounts where I thought, I think these are going to do well, and it's tax deferred, so that's great. Or some of it's in Roths or HSAs. So, and they've done really well. But I thought, I got to balance trying to pick a good investment with simplicity and taxes. So maybe I should just keep my individual stocks in this one taxable account that I have, which that's a given. And then where I've put the individual stocks in various retirement or tax advantaged accounts, they've done well. I like to hold for 2 years at a minimum. But again, there's always competing interests. Maybe I should just sell those and fold them into my overall fund asset allocation. And that'll give me a lot of flexibility in terms of dealing with rebalancing by buying and selling in the tax deferred accounts. So I've started down that path. I didn't sell all the stocks that were in retirement accounts, but I sold one tranche in one account, and it's helped a lot. It's actually been a great way to rebalance without triggering taxes. I've kept my REITs for now, which I like. Again, I always try to keep my eye on the ultimate goal, which to me is, simplicity, tax efficiency, diversity, low cost, right? Those are sort of those are the North, collectively the North Star. And so I like to kind of do the second half of this. I like to think about my asset allocation across all accounts. And for that reason, when I've allocated across all accounts, if I want to rebalance, I can do it in a tax efficient way, hopefully in my tax deferred accounts. Obviously I always worry about asset location. So I don't put REITs in a taxable account. I don't put municipal bond funds in a 401k. Well, do they even have municipal bond funds in a 401k? I can't imagine. Anyway, so that's my high level view and a very quick view of how to invest in a taxable account. You want tax efficient investments, but you also want investments that you can hold indefinitely, I think, along with the ability, if at all possible, to rebalance just by just buying and selling inside tax deferred accounts, if you can manage that. And of course, if all or most of your money is in 401ks and IRAs, then it ain't an issue, right? It's easy. All right. One other thing that came up related kind of is HSAs. I mentioned that I like my HSAs to get as fat as a tick, like my Roth IRAs, because of the tax benefits. There is a caveat to HSAs. Roths are a great thing for inheritance, right? Because the person inheriting it, it's tax free. HSAs don't work that way, but still incredible tax advantages. So what I do is I tend to put again, this is one of the benefits of allocating across all of your accounts. I can put just stocks in the Roth, and whether it's a total stock market or whatever, and the same thing with HSAs. The HSAs, what I do is I save all of our medical receipts for over $100 because we don't spend our HSA now. And so I don't know how much we've saved up in receipts, but I can pull the money out of the HSA with those receipts tax-free anytime I want, this year, 10 years from now, whatever. So that's a nice thing to have. And then, but my real plan is, as we get older, and presumably we'll need more medical care, that's when I'll start tapping it. So I kind of view it as 65 and over. I don't know. It's just not that there's any magic to that. Actually, with 65, there kind of is. That is kind of a magical number for HSAs, because it's at 65, you can take money out for non-medical reasons. You'd have to pay taxes, but you wouldn't have to pay a penalty. You know, the whole penalty for 401ks and IRAs, 59.5. Well, with HSAs, it's actually 65. You got to hit 65 before you avoid the 10% penalty. But again, it's only if you take it out for non-qualified medical reasons. So that's been my approach to HSAs and Roths, kind of treat them similarly. Although, you know, from a estate planning perspective, they're very different. All right, that's what I got. Now let's get to the important stuff. Your questions. Remember, if you want to ask a question or have me discuss a topic, just tag me, please, because it shows up orange, at least on my computer. I don't know what it looks like where you are. So Greg says, first, thanks so much for all you do to educate and not advise. You know, I had some person say, I know you're no longer an investment advisor. I've never been an investment advisor. Anyway, my wife, this is interesting. My wife is a biblical scholar. So I also appreciate your seemingly tangential reference to the study of authorship of the Bible. Fascinating book, regardless of your religious views. Of course, it's not really a book, right? It's not even 66 books. It's more than that. Some of them are pieced together. Anyway, just try to read the story about Noah's Ark. It doesn't make any sense until you realize, oh, it's two different stories. Huh. Same thing with the creation story. Anyway, this is not what this show's about. Let me get back to the question. The bad news is we seem to be at least potentially entering uncharted water where the likes of Jeremy Grantham are predicting an historic crash and depression of the American market. Yeah, by the way, he's been predicting that since he was like 12. He just regularly predicts it. He predicted it a year and a half ago. And when he predicted it, he said, by the way, you can never predict when it's going to happen. So he's been claiming it's 12 noon and eventually he'll be right. By the way, I don't say that to suggest that he's not a very smart person. Great investor, although I don't think does he manage money anymore? I don't think so. Anyway, I mean, anyone can look at the market and say it's overvalued. That's really what we know. And so eventually it's going to correct, right? Anyway, with a possible decade plus return to strong growth. I know nobody currently owns the crystal ball. However, his argument and evidence are compelling. Okay. I had intended to sit on the sidelines and wait for at least a couple of months in case a seismic fall in the S&P curves. However, if VU and VTI don't come back to life for a decade or two, okay, could happen, right? Well, you see where I'm going with this. Could now be the first time in well over that a three-fund portfolio should be significantly skewed to emerging markets and DM, I guess developed markets? Yeah. Or similarly, sectors within the US market. Okay. Dying to hear your thoughts. Okay. So we all know that assets are highly valued. Stocks are, bonds are. Crypto, I can't even say crypto is overvalued because as compared to what? But, you know, bonds are expensive as compared to history. Stocks are expensive compared to earnings, book value, sales, you know, whatever, as a general rule. So as Greg points out, there are some asset classes, we can look at this. So some asset classes, let's just use the PE as an example, are less expensive. So we look at the total stock market ETF, and I don't see the PE. They change where they put stuff. All right, I'll go to portfolio. So it's 21. I think this is a forward PE, but whatever, it's 21, right? Now let's do Vanguard small cap. What do we get I don't know. Here we go, whatever this is. I may own this, I'm not even sure. The tickers, I don't always keep up with them. Anyway, so what was that other one, 21, right? This one is going to be less, 15, 16. Okay, I wouldn't call that cheap, but it's certainly less expensive based on earnings, right? And then we can do VMAX. This one I do know, and I do own this fund and have owned it for 20 years. And we can go to portfolio. It's going to be even cheaper, I think, around 10 or 12. Here we go, 12. So And we could, by the way, we could do, let's do VXUS, which is sort of a total international, right? Let's look at this PE. And I apologize if I'm going through this too quickly, but it's 13. So it does underscore, the folks that say, oh, I'm 100% US stocks, I'm like, I've just never been comfortable doing that. And it's not even per se because of the current valuations. We saw small cap is more reasonably priced than total market or S&P 500. But when you look at some of these valuations overseas, it's hard not to have some exposure to that. The thing we have to keep in mind is just because something's inexpensive relative to whatever doesn't mean that the price won't go down further. We got that to look forward to. And just because something's expensive doesn't mean the price won't go up. But I do think long term, revenues, profit, cash flow is what matters. And it ultimately is what will drive value, prices. And, we've certainly got a lot of meddling, I guess, if you will, with central banks, and that's affecting things. And COVID and fiscal policy, mailing out checks, that affects things. But that's started to work through the system, and I think eventually we'll come back down to reality. When, I don't know. I think Jeremy predicted like now, pretty much. The market did go down, and it's been up. I mean, today it was up. S&P was up 189. My Apple stock 261, 2.61%. So I can't predict this, Greg. This is why I think the best approach is to have a diversified portfolio. Have I said this before? I feel like it sounds like a broken record. A diversified portfolio of low-cost index funds. You can do it in a 3-fund portfolio. If you like some specific overexposure to small cap or small cap value, add that fund. If you like exposure to emerging markets, add that fund. And I don't try to time it. I haven't taken any money out. I haven't changed my stock bond allocation. Although by selling the one tranche of Wells Fargo, that did, I guess, lower my stock bond allocation, not by much. And that really wasn't the point per se. It did reduce my individual stock exposure. And I was happy to do that because it's good. The values went up. Banks went up. Apple's gone up. They had an incredible quarter. It was ridiculous. But, I needed to rein that in a bit. And I could do it without triggering taxes. So that's my take, Greg. I'm not big on the prognosticators. And in fairness to Jeremy Grantham, when I've read his stuff, I was reading some of his articles from like a year and a half ago, earlier today, where he was basically saying the same thing. And he got the timing. He didn't get the timing wrong because he pointed out that he doesn't know the timing. But, it clearly didn't happen a year and a half ago. But in that sense, what he's saying is nothing special. Everyone knows prices are where they are. I think he adds some color to it. It's what he called a super bubble. Yeah, I don't even know what that means. Whatever. Okay, there you go. That's my take on it. Just looking to see if anyone's still watching. There are a few of you out there. Did you watch the football games? Just amazing games. Did you hear the Bengals are going to the Super Bowl? I'll be in Ohio to watch that game. I wish I wasn't going to be in California to watch it. Speaking of which, GW lives in California, where his or her HSA is state taxable. Figures. Seriously? That's awful. Anyway, is it best to still let it get fat as a tick with VTI or invest in untaxable treasuries and other tax-efficient so when we talk about investing in the HSA, first of all, I'm assuming you're not spending it every year on medical expenses, which if you are, that's great. That's what the HSA is for. So this is long-term investing. To me, taxes, and they're important, but you have to think about what your after-tax return is going to be. And I'm not sure in the long term, treasuries will outperform, let's say, US stocks on an after-tax basis just because California decides to tax HSAs, which I still find stunning in any event. So I'm not sure I would go that route. But I certainly would factor in the taxes. you're not paying federal. Depends what tax bracket you're in California. I don't know how they tax it. Do they tax it when it goes in, when it comes out? But if it's when it comes out, will you still be living in California? Where are you going to, retire somewhere else? But I think you're absolutely right to consider it. But I don't know that it would make that dramatic of a change to me. Of course, I don't live in California, and I know the taxes there can get pretty rough. Beautiful state. Benjamin Smith says, do you change your fund selections depending on whether the account is taxable or not? Generally, no. There are what they call tax managed funds. And Vanguard has some. I mean, Vanguard, if I could spell Vanguard, tax managed. Well, they have a tax managed balanced fund. I don't want that. Tax managed funds. What do we get? They're just the balanced fund. Maybe that's all they have. I don't know. But here's what I was going to say. I'm investing in U.S. stock total market index fund or international total index fund or their small cap index, and so they're tax efficient. I don't think they have a tax managed version of those funds. I don't think they need it. Of course, maybe they have it, and I don't know what I'm talking about. So you always have to factor in that possibility. So I don't have to think about that. I mean, depending on what you want to invest in, there could be tax managed versions of the fund. So you should consider that. Now, I do avoid certain types of funds like REITs, for example. But that's my approach, Benjamin. Marv. Let's see. NTSX, which I guess is a fund, or ETF, okay, contains the 500 largest market cap U.S. equities and uses margin to optimize. I'm not sure that's the right word, but to optimize results. In Portfolio Visualizer, NTSX generates better historical results than VU. What are the reasons to not replace VU with NTSX in a portfolio? I have no earthly idea, but let's figure it out. Maybe there aren't. Maybe we're all going to switch to NTSX. All right, here's Portfolio Visualizer. NTSX, 100%. And you said compare it to VU, 100%. Oops. Got to move it over here. And I also want to come over here for a minute. NTSX. Wisdom Tree. Oh, Wisdom Tree. So it's a balanced fund, and you say they invest on margin. All right. Well, the first problem, Marv, is that Wisdom Tree is a fairly new company, I think, but in any event, this fund only goes back to January 2019. So it's 3 years of data. We'll look at the data, but that doesn't really help us, right? And now when I look at it, I mean, it outperformed, but not by much. So yeah, I wouldn't personally be jumping to Wisdom Tree at this point from an S&P 500. Standard deviation is a little lower, but again, we're talking 3 years of data. It basically outperformed. Most of its outperformance was in 2020. Didn't do so well in 2021. Yeah, so Marv, I wouldn't. I don't know what it is about the human condition. We just can't keep it simple. We just can't. I mean, who sits around and thinks, I'm going to start a fund and we're going to do covered calls or margin and honestly believes that they will outperform. I mean, most funds don't in the long term. And it's virtually impossible to predict which of the few will outperform, particularly large U.S. large cap. I mean, in some other sectors, it's easier, not easy, but easier. But we just can't say I've got a good friend and he just, he's got his stop losses. He may be listening. I don't know. He's got his stop losses and his puts and it kind of reminds me of a golfer who's got all these gadgets on, you know, so that they keep their head, you know, they got the thing around the head so they keep their head down. I don't want to invest like that. I just want to be smooth right through the swing, head down. I could admire the shot later. I haven't played golf in years, really. Anyway, that's my take, Marv. We need to, I'll tell you what, if we're doing this live show in 10 years, remind me and we'll check out if Wisdom Tree is still even in business. And we'll see how they did. Oh, here's a good one from Gage. He says, check out, rather than trying to read that, I'll just type it in and show it to you if I understand what this is. And maybe I don't. Oh, here it is. So it's an ETF research center. Here it is. It's etfrc.com/tools.php, I guess. And it analyzes ETF overlaps by weight, number of holdings, and blah, blah, blah. So let's see. Fund overlap. Here it is. You guys see this? I know it's kind of small on the screen. Let me just go ETF tools, go down here, fund overlap. Oh, and they put some in, SPY and QQQ. Find the overlap. Well, it's already done for us. That's a pretty cool tool. Thank you. I'll put that in the newsletter. By the way, if you don't subscribe to the newsletter, I've closed it. I'm not taking any new subscriptions. No more signups. You know, I'm kidding. The link's below the video, whatever. Okay. Yeah, see, now the problem, Gage, and I got to be honest, I've never been upset with someone in the chat, but I'm pretty upset with you right now because this will be hours and hours of my day tomorrow. Huh. You know, this one, well, I guess it's interesting overlap, but I could imagine others that might be more interesting to me anyway. This is great. Thank you. See what you learn on this show, and not from me, from you guys. So remember, tag me in your questions, or I'll skip over them. But I see one from Brian that I'll read. Wondering if Series I bonds count as a first taxable account since we are limited each year. Must be decent if we are limited, right? Well, I don't know if that makes. I mean, I think the I bonds right now are attractively priced. Right, you're getting basically 7%, 7.12%. Again, it's going to adjust here in a few months. But risk-free, that's hard to beat. So, but you say you're leaning towards VTSX as a first taxable fund. So here's the thing. It's like saying, you know what? I've just moved out on my own. I'm gonna cook my first meal. I've never cooked before. I'm gonna cook my first meal. I'm kind of debating salt or sugar. I think I'm gonna go with sugar as my main. I don't know. It's like, well, wait a minute. What are you cooking? Maybe we need to know that first, right? So what's your recipe? That's all an investment plan, asset allocation plan, whatever you want to call it. That's all it is. What's your recipe? If it's a 3-fund portfolio, your recipe is basically US stocks, international stocks, and US bonds. That's what you want. In some percentage, you want probably, let's just say, we'll just make up 10% bonds, 30% international, 60% US. It's not the only way to make the dish. Some chefs get wild, they light it on fire, whatever. We could change the percentages, but that's the basic idea, right? So you don't want to sit there, you don't want to start your journey with I bonds or VTSAX. You want to start your journey with what's my plan? What's my recipe? What do I want? You could have both in your dish, right? I do. I have both of those in my recipe. Although I bonds, again, they don't really check the simplicity box. That's the one thing I don't know how long I'll keep mine. We'll see. I hope that makes sense, though. The whole recipe thing. I like that analogy. Is that an analogy? Anyway. Gage now wants to know what I think about cloning super investors. Also, is it crazy to allocate 10% of Roth IRA to individual value stock investments? Well, putting aside Alibaba, I don't think it's crazy to allocate 10% of your portfolio to individual stocks. That's basically what I did. I would be careful about cloning super investors like a Warren Buffett, even a Warren Buffett. So I guarantee you that he owns stocks today that he probably wouldn't go out and buy. And he definitely, it's conceivable that if you gave him $1 million to invest, he wouldn't buy a single company that Berkshire owns. So it's not just what they own, but it's when they bought it and at what price. And you often don't know if they're short anything because that's not disclosed in the 13F, at least last time I checked. So I think it's if you're trying to pick individual stocks, I like the idea of getting ideas from super investors. And we've looked at data, Rama, I guess is how you say it. Maybe I've got that wrong. Maybe it's Data Roma. It's R-O. I always get the O and the A confused. Yeah, here it is. Data Roma. I don't know what the Roma stands for. But these are super investors. And you can click on this, it'll tell you what they own, what they've bought. Here's Howard Marks of Oaktree. I don't want that ad. Can I close it? All right. And it shows what he's added recently, the latest 13F, I guess, right? What he sold, what he, So he's obviously a very smart investor, and I already see companies in here I just would never buy. Not because I think they're bad investments, they're just not my approach. And most of them, I don't even know what they are. So there's that. So yeah, I think you get ideas, but you got to be careful, Yeah. Justin says, hey, Rob, great work on the channel. I'm learning a lot. Thank you. Do you think a 50-50 split for the bond portion of my portfolio between, and he gives two tickers, they're Fidelity funds, I'm pretty sure, is good, or should I simply do just one? That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. Let's, we'll look at the funds first. So the first one is FXNAX. That's a US bond. That's like a total bond fund. That's like BND, right? Cheap, 2.5 bips. Go to the portfolio. It's an intermediate term, duration of 6.5 years. It's got government, meaning US government. Well, I know that it is. Corporates, and I guess this is probably mainly asset-backed securities. So that's the first one. So in a 3-fund portfolio, this is the only thing you'd have, right? This would be this kind of fund. That's what you'd have. But you want to do 50-50, and the other one is probably a TIPS, FIPDX. Yeah, so it's a tip. So here's the deal. And let's just go to the portfolio. I want to see what the duration is. It's probably intermediate term as well. Yeah. I think 50-50 split between a total bond fund and TIPS fund is more than reasonable. It does add a little complexity, which I wouldn't dismiss, right? You've got 2 bond funds now instead of 1. It's what Swinson. Now I got to look it up. Swinson, I know. Yeah. He's passed away, but he ran the Yale Endowment and wrote a couple of books. One of which, no, I've read 2 of them. Now that I think about it, I'll show them to you. Unconventional Success is the one. Let me pull it up in Amazon. Here it is. So I've read this a while ago. It's actually in this book, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that he suggests the sort of 50%, I think he might have said treasuries, but I think a total bond fund is fine. And TIPS, and his thought was, if inflation is higher than we expect, than the market expects, TIPS will do better. And if it's lower than the market expects, nominal bonds, total bond fund, treasuries will do better. We don't know which it's going to be, so we'll just do 50-50. I actually read an article today. Let me see if I can pull it up briefly, maybe. Where did I see that? See, I took a note somewhere, but I don't think I've got it. Oh, I know where it is. I read an article today. Here's the paper. I'll show it to you in just a second. I haven't read the whole paper. I just saw it today for the first time. Here it is. I'll enlarge this for you. This is a very long paper, 67 pages. And what's the guy's name that wrote it? I don't even remember. Is it on here somewhere? Oh, here we go. Edward McQuarrie. And he was basically looking at the 4% rule, and you're spending your money in retirement, and what asset allocation should you have, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know why I said blah, blah, blah. It's what this channel's about, blah, blah, blah. He seems to think that maybe for your bonds, maybe 20% allocated to tips might be okay, not 50-50. So I don't know. There's the paper again. If you want to trudge through 67 pages, which some of you will, I know it, and you can deny it, but I know you will do it. And that's okay. Maybe you can tell me what it says. So, I think it's a reasonable approach, Justin. Not the only approach, but I think a reasonable one. So VJ, he's our friend from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Insightful video on 3 ways to declutter your investments. Started thinking about decluttering myself. Completed rebalancing. Very easy on Fidelity. Complicated on Vanguard. That's interesting. I wonder why that is. Why is that, VJ? Maybe you could let us know. Anyway, thinking of reducing my 6 funds to 2 or 3 funds on Vanguard. Your advice on funds, taxable and tax deferred. Well, if you were going to do a 3-fund portfolio, you've got your VTSAX, you could use VXUS or the mutual fund version, the ticker I don't know off the top of my head, and BND, let's say. If you were going to try to streamline it, you could keep the BND allocation in a tax deferred account. And if you have Roths, you could make sure that one of the stock funds goes there or some allocation to it. But I mean, that would be it. I mean, and for your taxable account, if you had your bonds in tax deferred, there you go. Now, I would say I probably, if I had a choice, would put the U.S. stocks in the taxable account because some amount of the dividends from an international fund can often, in my experience, not be qualified. Because have you ever seen the definition of what a qualified dividend is? What is a qualified dividend? It's like ridiculous. If I can find a quick definition for you. Oh, here we go. The dividend must be paid by a U.S. company or a qualifying foreign company, whatever that means. The dividends are not listed IRS as those that do not qualify. The required dividend holding period is met. It's this business right here that I think can cause some dividends paid out of international funds to not be qualified. Now, you could do further investigation into a fund and find out. Call Vanguard or Fidelity or wherever you're going to buy your fund. They'll probably tell you. Hope they'll tell you. I didn't know that when I invested in an international fund in my taxable account. No, not just another mistake I made. Yeah, it didn't kill me. But it kind of did. Not financially. I don't like not knowing stuff like that. But I didn't. I just didn't think about it. Well, now you know. Gus, I want to convert my mostly cash account at Fidelity to the 3-fund portfolio. Should I use VTI, VXS, BND, or FSKAX, FTIHX, FSITX? And the answer to that question is, yep. I mean, See, if you ask me what's better, Coke or Pepsi, that's easy. It's Pepsi, let's be honest. But they're all good. I mean, let me show you something here. If you just Google 3-fund portfolio, let's just Google that together. My site used to be on the first page. My YouTube video is. Anyway, the site I wanted to show you was not mine. Who wants to see my site? The Bogleheads, here they are. And they have a 3-fund portfolio page. This is in their forum. And I like this because it gives you, different allocations, but it gives you different funds. I'm not actually a huge fan of the zero funds. That's not true. I think they're perfectly good. And if you have them, that's great. I would probably go over here, which is what you've done, right? FSKAX, FTIHX, here it is, and FX. You've probably been on the Boglehead site. What's the FSITX? Is that on this FSITX? Not on here. Interesting. What's FSITX? Maybe I'm misreading the ticker, or maybe you've typed it in wrong. But in any event, doesn't matter. You get the idea. Then they have ETF options down here. So I think these are all good choices. Between Vanguard and Fidelity, I think they both work. Patrick. So this is going to be a tough question for me. I'm going to be honest with you, Patrick. So Patrick says, thank you for educating us through these videos. Thoughts on the following portfolio. 30% Canadian stock market. Okay, so right there, I'm out of my element. 30% US stock market, 30% international, and 10% emerging. So I'm assuming you live in Canada. If you don't live in Canada, then my big question would be, why 30% in Canadian stocks? But assuming that you do, for a stock portfolio, seems perfectly within the range of reasonable to me. You do have a total of 40% in international. That's higher than I have. Not that what I have is the best or whatever. One thing you could think about at 40%, let's think about this, 40%. Let's go over to Morningstar again, and let's put in VT. So that would just be one fund, and I think it's 40% international from a U.S. perspective. See, this is probably going to have too much U.S. for you because I think it's 60%. Yeah, more or less. And of course, it's not going to have nearly 30% in Canadian. Yeah, 2.85%. So yeah, this probably wouldn't work for what you're trying to achieve. But I don't know. What you've laid out seems reasonable to me. I say that as sort of a generic statement. Obviously, your specific circumstances, your goals, you own bonds, but for a long-term portfolio, it's pretty well diversified. Again, I'm assuming you live in Canada. All right. Novelty Robot says, thank you for answering my email last week. You're welcome, Novelty. I don't remember addressing you by that name in the email, but maybe I just don't remember. Although that seems like a hard name to forget, with only, particularly if it was just a week ago. Thanks. Someone gave a thumbs up. Thank you. Yeah, so the power YouTubers, every video, be sure to give my video a thumbs up and subscribe. I don't do that. Maybe I should. I don't know. It just seems, I don't know. But I appreciate the thumbs up. What percentage of your equity portfolio is in international? Well, I can tell you that down to the penny. Maybe. International currently is 26.06%. 16.19% is in sort of developed country, total international kind of situation. And the other roughly 10% is in emerging markets. But of course, U.S. companies do business all over the world, right? But yeah. I'm not claiming, by the way, that that's like the best way to go. It works for me. I'm comfortable with it. VJ says I should do a video on taxes for investors. I'm not a tax pro, though. That's the thing. I'm not an expert. And I've made my tax mistakes. Yeah. Nothing terrible, but. So this is a good question from Danny. I am 70, retired. Thoughts on Vanguard, Wellington, and a taxable account. I didn't see that coming. Well, the problem, so Vanguard Wellington is what's called a balanced fund, which means it owns stocks and bonds. Excuse me. My cough is almost gone, but not 100%. But I don't think I've coughed all day today until I start this show. So here's the Wellington fund. It's done very well. I'm pretty sure it's a 60-40, roughly, right? Yep. Well, it's not really. It's according to Morningstar, it's more like 70-30, whatever. But in any event, we go to performance. I'm concerned about distributions, but we'll see. Yeah, so you got 260 here and another. Well, we can just come over here. So you got $3 and call it 30 cents. So on a $48 NAV, And I'm just looking, that's what? What did I say? 330 on 48 is like 7%? I don't know. That's just a guess. Let's see how close I was. Pulling out my calculator. 330 divided by 4860. I said 7%. 6.8. All right. So, okay, I don't know why I'm being so goofy. You're going to pay taxes on that every year. So that would be my concern, or from a tax perspective anyway. And it's interesting that it's, as I think about it, it's capital gains. So, bonds are going to pay interest. There's that problem. And the interest was 83 cents. Not terrible. Of course, bond yields are low right now, as we all know. But this is an actively managed fund, right? I mean, it's Vanguard, but it's not an index fund. And one thing you can look at, I'll show you this, is turnover percentage, which I thought was on this page, maybe. I think it's down here. 35%. So it buys and sells approximately 35% of its portfolio every year. So there's transaction costs for that, and it can, as we saw, can trigger some capital gains. By the way, this is not horrible. I mean, it's a lot compared to an index fund. But like, if we go just to put it in perspective, let's look at Kathy Wood's fund, ARC. Of course, watch, it'll be lower. But I don't think so. Didn't we look at this a few weeks ago? It was over 100%. Maybe I'm misremembering. 71%. All right. So still pretty significant. Okay. Kyle says, I put a lot of covered call ETFs in my brokerage, and we've talked about many of these, QYLD and so on. I just want it for income. Thoughts on this? I personally don't like that approach. First of all, why do I care about income? In other words, I want total return. Why is the fact that it's distributing taxable income to me a feature and not a bug? Now, some would say, well, you get that income even when the market's going down. Well, with covered call, that actually might be true. A falling market might be better because your shares aren't, the options are performing better, at least assuming these are covered calls, which I think they all are. Yeah. But when you compare them to whatever, say, underlying index they're tracking, long term, they don't outperform, they underperform. At least every one I've looked at. Maybe some that you've got there are an exception. But when I compare them, whether it's compared into the QQQ or the S&P 500 or whatever, long term, just buying the fund. This is where I just don't understand the need to complicate everything. I understand the income really makes people feel comfortable. But so do owning 100% bonds. I talk to people who are very comfortable because they feel safe. Not going to lose any money. No, you're not. You're not going to meet your financial goals or have as much to live on in retirement. But you're not going to be on a roller coaster. You're going to be riding. I started to say the teacups, but I got to tell you, those teacups are evil. I would never get on a teacup again. So anyway, Kyle, that's my approach. I'm just not a big fan of the covered call ETFs. I can't say that there's never a circumstance where maybe they make sense, but I can't think of what that would be. Prescott says, I'm trying to remember. Prescott, I think, has joined the show maybe in the past, but not for a while. Or maybe I'm just thinking of a different Prescott. I wanted to get your thoughts on the TSP and moving my funds into the Vanguard ETFs using the 3-fund or 5-fund portfolio. I will have a decent government pension and I'm 56 years old. Well, I think either is fine. I mean, the TSP, obviously, which is the Thrift Savings Plan, available to federal employees and postal workers and military. Very inexpensive. It's very simple, which some people complain about. I think it's a feature, not a bug. I do think, and I don't know the details, but pulling money out of it, I think, can be a bit of a hassle. I think they take from every fund. Of course, you can rebalance, but there may be limitations on when. I don't know that to be true. But whether it's a Vanguard, 3, 4, or 5 fund solution, or Fidelity, whatever, they're going to be low cost as well. And you might have, the thing I would look at is what sort of other features you'll have. Getting your cash out, cash management. Do they offer debit cards? Or maybe you don't care about that. You're just going to transfer the money to your bank once a quarter, once a year, whatever. In that case, I don't know, the TSP might be just fine. But I think either approach would probably, I'm struggling to think of an advantage or disadvantage beyond just the mechanics of it all. And I'm struggling. I think they'd probably both work well. I suppose I'd probably, if I had the TSP, I'd probably end up somewhere else with it eventually. Just because my sense is it might be easier to manage. But again, I've never participated in the TSP, so I don't know what I'm talking about. So this is an interesting question from Clayton, and I confess I don't. Oh, I see. I was going to say I don't fully understand, but now I think we do. Would you rather hold SCHD, which is the Schwab Dividend ETF, or VTIAX, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 mutual fund? No, yeah. Oh, no, it's international. Why did I think? Oh, that's right. Is it VT? Yeah, VTIAX. Sorry. Total International Mutual Fund. So they're very different funds. Would you rather hold them in a taxable account in a Roth if you had to choose between the two? Huh. Okay, well, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. If I'm in a Roth, I think both would be good. I don't know that I have a preference one or the other. In a taxable account, well, they're two different investments, but maybe the question is where you're going to put them, right? I'd probably go with SCHD, I think, in the taxable account, maybe. Let me look at the yield. I don't think the yield is crazy, but it might be over 2%. Of course, the VTIAX. So here, it's 278. That's 12-month yield. That's for Schwab, because it is a dividend-focused fund. VTIAX, though, let's see, its yield it's going to be less than that, I got to believe. No, it's more. So, yeah, I mean, plus you've got the issue of whether all the dividends are qualified or not, right? I'd have to look into that. But I'd probably lean towards the Schwab fund in a taxable account, I think, but I would do more analysis. Justin, what portfolio withdrawal strategy do you favor? I assume by that you mean how much I can take out each year. So my number one approach is to be able to live on 3% or less. That's my number one approach, because then, at least based on history and Monte Carlo analysis, it doesn't much matter. You should be fine. If I couldn't do that, and I had to live on, let's say, 4 or 4.5% in year one, then I would prefer an approach that did that, but I would put guardrails up. So, like, I would never. I would do the calculation for what I was taking out. I would adjust for inflation if I had to. If I could skip the inflation adjustment one year, I'd skip it. Probably wouldn't do that now, right, with prices going up. But I would, before I actually took the money out, I would figure out what percentage of my portfolio it is, and if it went above 6%, I'd probably pull it back and take out no more than 6% and do some belt tightening if I had to. So that's probably what I would do. Yeah, I think so. And by the way, if that's not what you meant, well, you can ask again. Because sometimes what people mean by that is what accounts are you going to take it out of first and all that sort of thing, which is a good question too. But that's not how I read your question. Okay, John. Oh, this is interesting. This is more of a comment, I guess, than a question. So we had 40% of VTI, total U.S. market, is core, with 15% in international, use VXUS, 15% VTV, which I know, but I can't remember what it is. Oh, just a Vanguard value. I guess the V would give it away. And 15% in VBR, which is small cap value. In a Roth. So obviously tilted towards value. He put it in Portfolio Visualizer and realized that 85% VTI, 5% VBR, 5% VXUS, and 5% VTV is much better. Well, I'm not doubting that. I don't know. But I would suggest two things. Look at rolling returns because the time period matters. So I don't know how far back that goes because some of those funds could be limited in data. I mean, at a minimum, you want to go back 10 years. But you want to look at rolling returns because the start and end dates can really influence which one wins out. And the second thing I would say is, I think historical data is important to a point, but I wouldn't let that be the only thing you consider. And I think the more narrow the asset class, the more nuanced, if you will, the less I rely on historical data. If it's just the broad stock market, okay, that's, it doesn't mean history is going to repeat itself, but that's where I get nervous with something like, a small cap value. I mean, I've invested in small cap value for a long time, and history suggests it will do well, but that doesn't mean it will. So, VG, I agree with you about my tax problem. So Bingo Knows says, I know having patience is key, but when should I jump ship with regards to poor performing investments like a mutual fund? A year, 2 years? How about individual stocks or an ETF? It's a great question. And it's why I eventually, and we're talking 20 plus years ago, moved to index funds because I don't ever have to jump ship. They're not performing poorly. They're just tracking the index. ARK is performing poorly, although it had a good day today. So that you're sort of left, right? Do I sell ARK? Hopefully it comes back? What do I do? Does she know what she's doing? Doesn't she? Is she a genius? I don't know. I don't have the answer to any of those questions, which is why I go with index funds. With individual stocks, and I only own 4, but I go with stocks that I think I can hold on to in good times and bad. Here's the thing. When a stock is doing poorly, if the company is sound and it's got good cash flows, that's enough for me to not jump ship. But take a company that's not even profitable. I mean, does Robinhood even make money? Let's use Robinhood as an example. And maybe it does. I don't know. Here's Robinhood. Of course, it just went public not long ago, so what financials do we even have? Well, trailing 12 months, it's lost, is that millions, billions, trillions? Why don't I see it? Billions. Wow. It lost a few dollars, right? So here, why would I have any confidence in this company? By the way, that doesn't mean an investment today won't pay off. Just like you could buy a lottery ticket today and you could hit it big. But I don't have any confidence in this. When I go to Apple, and I go to its financials, and I see these kind of numbers, net income, and it's just a ridiculous number. This gives me comfort. It doesn't mean the company can't fall on hard times, and every company does eventually, right? But it helps me not jump ship. And there have been times when I've owned Apple, it's gone down, 2018 into 2019. I bought more. That's my answer. If you're in actively managed funds, that's the tricky part. If they're significantly underperforming their index, there's no way to know if they're going to turn it around or what. I left Legg Mason Value Trust before Bill Miller's fund crashed for that very reason. I thought, he's eventually going to underperform, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to stick around. Adi says, thanks for taking his question last week, but he used the wrong tickers. Okay, here's what he'd like to look at. 2 funds. The first one, FCNTX, which is is that the Contra Fund? Yes, Contra Fund. Okay, we know that one. But I'll just hit enter and go to the next screen. And the other fund is FBGRX, Blue Chip Growth. These are probably similar. In theory, contra fund can invest in value stocks too, as I recall, but it doesn't. I mean, its average, stock is a super large cap growth stock, right? And if we go to Fidelity Blue Chip Growth, 79 basis point expense ratio, it's probably similar, right? Yeah. Not quite as big as contra fund, but even more growth. So look at that price to earnings. Both of these funds would scare me today if I were looking at it from a valuation perspective. I personally would not invest in either of these funds. It's just not in my nature to do that. But they're very comparable. How would you pick between them? I don't know. I'm just looking at what they own. I mean, it's a lot of the same stuff. This one, so the growth fund, the blue chip growth, which is more growth, it seems to be focused just on growth, right? That to me, it just from what we've looked at just in a few minutes, you do a lot more research. But for example, when you come over to contra fund, you see some value stocks, right? Berkshire, or at least, I mean, this might end up in the blend category, but certainly not a high growth stock. Can't imagine United Health is a high growth stock. Obviously, some of these others are. And that's why, by the way, you see a slightly lower PE. It's the blue dots here, not over here. A very scientific analysis there. But to me, these are both kind of expensive. But I suppose if I had to invest in one, I'd probably go with the contra fund because it's a little less expensive relative to revenue and whatnot, which is probably not a sound reason to pick it, because the truth be told is I wouldn't invest in either one of them right now. Maybe never, but that's my take. Vinyl says there is a new kink in the RMD. Just what we need. Just when I thought I had it figured out, there's a kink. There's a fly in the ointment, a monkey in the wrench. Anyone got that reference? It's an easy one, really. Okay. There is a new, I laugh at my own jokes. I can't hear you guys laughing. I'm sure you're laughing a lot. Probably at me, not with me, but whatever. There is a new kink in the RMD of inherited accounts from before 2020. You can use the new IRS life expectancy table to retroactively recalculate the RMD. I just find that hard to believe. I'm not going to doubt you, Vinyl, but I find that really hard to believe. But why would you say it if it wasn't true? In my case, because I have an inherited IRA from before 2020, but the RMD is so small because it's a small IRA that it wouldn't be worth the trouble. But that's good to know. He says you have to find the life expectancy of your first year and you withdrew from the account, and then add the number of years since then to get your current life expectancy. Oh, I see. You can recalculate it maybe going forward. Well, that would make some sense, I suppose. Okay. So Slim Dog, welcome. I haven't seen you in a while. At least not that you've asked a question. Anyway, in a taxable account, would it be better to buy a total market index fund, ETF, or 3 index ETFs separately, large, medium, and small? Well, I'm not sure it would. I mean, you'd have to look at each fund to evaluate whether there would be a different tax result. The one thing that you can do with 3 funds, let's just see if I can model this. I don't know. Maybe I can. Let's try. So we'll do VTI here. And then we'll do VU for large cap. And we'll say, I don't know, we'll say 50%. And then I want Vanguard, you just call it mid cap. Mid cap, here we go, good. We'll call it 30. And Vanguard small, here we go, 20. Now, the one thing you can do, we've got this thing right here. Let's assume we're not going to rebalance. Now, I don't know how far back this data goes. Okay, good. 12 years or so. So we're not rebalancing. Now, of course, for VTI, there's no rebalancing, right? Just one fund. But here, you could imagine rebalancing these back to 50, 30, and 20. Right now, this, you say taxable? Yeah, taxable account. So, we'll ignore taxes for the moment. So there's the difference, 45,000. And we could look at rolling returns, which we should if we're going to do a full analysis, but this is fine for now. But now, so look at this, right? So the total stock market beat out the 3 fund with those allocations with no rebalancing. I'm curious, what I want to know is, does this number change if we add back in the rebalancing? This number shouldn't change at all because it's just one fund. 42,830, that's the number to remember. Where'd it go? 42,830, we can look at it again. There it is. All right, let's hit. Oh, this is so exciting. Went down. That's funny. Okay, wait a minute. I'm not done. Semi-annually, yes. Twice a year. I think that's what that means. Yeah, it's not moving much. So maybe it doesn't matter much. I mean, the idea is you can obviously rebalance and maybe get a little bit of extra oomph out of the returns. Of course, we're only talking 12 years, but yeah. Now, by the way, I guess if I were going to be totally fair, I would do the same. Here's what we'd really do. We'd look up VTI. We'd go to portfolio. We'd go to weights, right? So this is, I can do the math, 9% for small cap, right? So this would actually be 9% if we're going to try to model it exactly. And this is what, 8, 13, 19. If I did the math right. That's 28, so this should be 72. Whoops. Is that right? Yay, it equals 100. Now let's analyze it. Oh, hey, no, we're close. Maybe we rebalance too frequently. Let's go back to annually. Oh, how about no rebalancing? No, man, that's tough. VTI is tough to beat. I don't know how useful that was at all, Slim Dog, but there you go. I can tell you, for me, it wouldn't be worth the effort, plus the taxes, if you're rebalancing within a taxable account. How much is too much in an HSA? Well, in theory, you'd want to take out the last dollar of HSA the day you die to pay for that last shot of morphine. That was so morbid. I don't even know what dark place that came from. I mean, but they're not great to inherit. Yeah, they're taxable. Do you get? I wonder if you get. I don't know. You get some sort of stepped up pay. I don't think you do. I don't know. So I guess you could estimate your medical expenses, but I mean that's a crapshoot. So I don't know when I would stop accumulating money in the, because what I'd probably do, I wouldn't actually stop contributing. I would just start spending it. So for me, it's probably more an age issue, I'm thinking, than a dollar amount. All I know is I'm not there yet, but I don't know what the number is. It's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. Google might have an answer, but I doubt it. I mean, I guess you could just start spending it with your current medical. Here's the other thing. If you're keeping receipts over time, you would subtract the total value of those receipts from whatever your balance is, right? Because you could pull that money out tax-free and spend it on whatever. So keep that in mind. Patrick, have you ever dealt with financial anxiety? Well, yes. As a kid and as an adult. So as a kid, I'll tell you a story about me. I don't know if anyone cares. I had a weird childhood when it comes to money. So my parents divorced when I I guess one. I don't remember ever living, with both of them at the same time. They both remarried. The good news is everyone got along. When my dad and stepmom came to pick me up, my stepmom would come in and she and my mom would talk for like an hour while my dad waited in the car. Parents, if you're divorced, I know it can be hard to get along, but I'm going to tell you, it makes all the difference in the world to the kids. So my mom and stepfather, we middle class to, maybe on the lower side of the middle of middle class. They both worked at the gas company. Then my mom eventually quit to raise my sister and brother, who were much younger than I am. But my stepfather had a business. It failed. I can remember the day when my mom came down and said, we have to move out of the house. We're losing the house. We ended up not losing the house. But that's significant anxiety as a kid. And you're thinking right now, boy, that explains so much about you, Rob. It's all coming together now. My father drove a Rolls Royce and had a Mercedes, and my stepmother had a Mercedes. He had a nice house with a pool, and he was building a condo in Florida. But he died when I was 12 in a car accident. But the thing is I don't think he was actually good with money. He just made a lot of money and then he spent it. But so here I am with my mom and stepfather who are about to lose the house. And my father picks me up in a Rolls Royce, which I always thought was the ugliest car in the world. So it was a weird childhood. I didn't grow up living in that sort of, fancy car. If anyone that lived in central Ohio remembers the big hailstorm. I guess this would have been in the early 80s, I'm guessing. I mean, it was and we had this giant Thunderbird. I mean, it was like a city block long. You remember those with the headlights that got covered up and they would open up? And the hailstorm just beat the heck out of that thing. Dents were everywhere. And the hailstorm, this is kind of funny. It occurred like a month after my stepfather canceled the car insurance because he couldn't afford the car insurance. And so I drove that thing with dents all over it. It looked like a golf ball. Yeah. So, and then all of that, it just lives with you. You don't completely get rid of it. You all have the same thing. You all have your childhood story, whatever it might be. And part of growing up is dealing with, the baggage from childhood. Now, I mean, overall, I had a good childhood. I've got no complaints. People love me. I did well in school because I liked it, stayed out of trouble for the most part. But yeah, there was definitely financial anxiety as a child. And then the way that's translated into adulthood is I can have some anxiety. It's at a very, 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 very low level today, but I could have anxiety over money even when logically it just didn't make any sense. When you just look at the numbers, look at the checkbook. Yeah, we can eat, we can pay the rent, we're good. And I could still be like, so there you go. Patrick, that was probably more than you wanted to hear. I remember my father put me in the back of the Rolls and we drive through the Wendy's drive-through like I was like some important person. Yeah, and then I'd go home to reality, cut the grass, deliver newspapers. That's how I made money. All right. I always used to work at my dad's company. I used to roll posters, like you go to back then it was Kmart, I guess, I don't know, Walmart, but they're in those plastic sleeves where there's this metal rod and there's like a little notch in it. And you'd slide the poster in and then you put your hands over it. You had a little pedal and roll it up, twist it off, put it into the sleeve, put the label over it. I made $3.35 an hour, my dad's shop. He wouldn't let me do the flock posters with all the black stuff because it just gets all over you. And I always wanted to do those. That was like big time. He wouldn't let me. Okay, enough of that. I probably got some thumbs down, some dislikes after all of that rant. But you asked. Okay. Anita, the Fed is talking about increasing interest rates along with their various tools. Should I invest in any short, intermediate, or long-term bonds, or just 2x Dalio holding cash as my bonds? Well, I'm not sure what you mean by 2x Dalio. I personally would not invest in long-term bonds because the interest rate risk is just too much for my liking. I'm comfortable with intermediate term bonds, even though I know I might lose money in the short term. By the way, I'm probably going to lose money in the short term with stocks. But if I'm going to be just a buy and hold long-term investor, that's what I'm comfortable with. I do have some some municipal bonds, in a fund, and they're shorter term, but they're still classified, I think, as intermediate. Just double checking. I think like 4 or 5 years, 3 years. Doesn't say. I never understood why they do that. Hang on, bear with me. Yeah, duration's 4.6 years in my municipal bond fund. So I'm comfortable with that. Some won't be. Some would say, Rob, that's crazy. But when they tell me that, when they say you should be like all short term, I'm like, well, do you own stocks? Yeah. Well, they're expensive too. I guess one could say, yeah, but long term they'll do well and bonds won't. But then you get into the whole should I own bonds at all kind of discussion. And I think for someone certainly of my age, I should own bonds. Hey, maybe you're young. You don't need bonds. Justin wants to know who I'm taking. Who are you taking for the Super Bowl? Playoff games have been amazing. Hopefully the Super Bowl follows suit. Well, it's a good question. One thing that didn't play out as much, but the Rams' defensive line, Donald, they're just incredible. That could give the Bengals some trouble. I'm obviously rooting for the Bengals. I assume, are the Rams favored? Probably, just, where the Super Bowl's being played. Who's favored to win the Super Bowl? It's got to be the Rams, right? No, it's the Bengals. No, it's the Rams. I don't know. I don't do sports betting. So what's it mean when the Rams are -4.5 and the Bengals are +4.5? That means the Rams are favored, right? See, now you're going to say, Rob, wait a minute. You don't know this stuff? No, I don't gamble on sports. It takes the fun out of it for me. I used to hate gambling. I used to have a good friend that always wanted to gamble at golf. The snake. You golfers know what I'm talking about. It's like it took the fun out of it for me. But yeah, I don't know. And by the way, a lot of folks say that Ohio State can never produce a great quarterback, but they've got one now at the Bengals, right? Joe Burrow. I mean, he was at Ohio State. I'm just saying, maybe that doesn't count. Okay. Conscience wants to know, why are there no target date funds that are ETFs? That's a great question. I don't know the technical reason. I mean, target date funds, I assume that's true. Are there no target date? I was looking at this the other day. I know, I need to get a life. Target date ETFs. I think there might be some, maybe not. Most of them are fund of funds, meaning they own other funds. Not all of them. Maybe they all are. And I think that affects how they're constructed. But I don't know if it's a technical reason, a legal reason. I don't know. Yeah, according to the ETF database, there are no target date ETFs open in the market. I don't know why. Okay. Rodolfo, what do you think about a 4-fund portfolio, 25% each of VT? I don't like this. Well, here's the problem. VT, VTI, VOO, and BND. So BND is a bond fund, fine. VT is a total, world stock fund. We looked at that a minute ago. VTI is total US. VOO is S&P 500. There's too many overlaps. It's like 3 Russian dolls, right? You just pull them off and you get a smaller version. There's too much overlap. Like you could just do 75% in VT if you were comfortable with that, or 25% in VXUS, which is an international fund, and 50% in VTI. Like, why own VTI and VU? I mean, I know they're different, but we've looked at this before. The performance long term is pretty similar. I mean, I can show you. Maybe you didn't see that. I can show you in Portfolio Visualizer. If we look at VTI 100% and VU 100% and analyze them, this goes, let's see, so 12 years, 13 years, whatever that is. I mean, they're neck and neck, right? And here, there's some slight outperformance by the S&P 500 in part because of what large cap companies have done over the last decade. But, the standard deviation is very similar. So I just don't see why. I don't know why you'd own them both. Now, you might own them both because you've got a 401k at work and it has one or the other, and you need one of them there. But in your IRA, you prefer the other one or something like that. But that's my response. I just don't know. VT, VTI, and VOO strike me as there's a lot of overlap. There's differences in each of those, but there's a lot of overlap. So, for example, if I said to you, okay, 25 of each, so what's your U.S. stock allocation? Like, well, wait a minute. Okay, I've got 25 in VU, 25 in VTI, that's 50, and I got 25 in VT, but that's got international. I think it's 60%, or was it 70%? I got to do the math. I don't know. I just prefer a cleaner separation in my funds. I like if a fund that's going to cover an asset class rather than overlapping. There's always going to be some overlapping. I mean, even like if you do like a VXUS, which is, it's a excluding US fund, right? That's what the XUS means. But if we look at it in Morningstar, let's just see before I say what I mean, it's got 0.73 in US equities. I don't know why. So, there's always a little bit of overlap. But yeah, that would be my question for you, Rodolfo. Why that combination? Okay. Josh says, evening. How are we doing on time, by the way? Wow, it's 8:30. Just switched my 3-fund portfolio, which was 60-20-20. So I'm guessing 60 US, 20 international, 20 bonds, to SWYAX. Oh, it's a Target 45 fund. What do you think? Well, I'm going to assume it's in a retirement account. I think it's fine. I think it's great. I should look at it. 8 bips, so it's cheap. I assume you're going to retire sometime around 2045. Not that you have to, by the way. As I've said, there's no target date retirement cops out there enforcing the rule that if you buy this fund, you have to retire in 2045. Which actually is kind of important because you may not like the allocation of the fund that matches your retirement year. That's okay. Get a different target retirement fund. I've often thought that I could just, in a retirement account, pick one of these funds just to keep things simple and then change it every 5 years to keep it what I want. Anyway, so, it's very similar to what you had. It's not identical. Let's see. Yeah, it's got more international exposure. I don't personally have an issue with that. I think it's a perfectly reasonable decision. Without knowing a thing about you. But I mean, just comparing the two portfolios seems reasonable to me. John says he's got a portfolio that I might get back to, but he's got some funds in a Roth, but discovered, this week, I think I answered that question. Yes, I did. Carlos, struggling with guidance on having dividend ETF in a retirement versus taxable account when a qualified dividends will be taxed at 15% versus 22% respectively when I withdraw. I think it's a good point. So here's what he's saying. If I own it in a taxable account, the dividends that I get paid each year, they'll be qualified, let's assume, and I'll pay at a federal level, he's saying 15%. Okay. If he accrues those in a retirement account, he doesn't pay taxes each year. But when he takes them out, they get taxed as ordinary income, which is typically taxed higher than qualified dividends. and therefore he'll pay 22%. I think it's an interesting point. Now, I'm assuming you're maxing the retirement accounts out regardless. It's just a question of where to put it. But here's the thing, a dividend ETF can still be a fairly tax efficient investment. It depends what the yield is. But we were looking at, again, I'll go back to it, the Schwab fund. You don't mention what fund you're in. I would have no problem owning this in a taxable account. And yeah, it's got 2.78 dividends. I guess I should probably look at the distribution. But it's an ETF, so it shouldn't distribute capital gains. It does not. And so for this year, it distributed 225 on a NAV of 77. So, I mean, that's not too bad, right? I mean, I'm trying to do the math again. What is that? 1 1/3? 77.63. Did I say 1 1/3? 7 is 70, 714.21. Oh, that's almost 3%. 2.25 divided by 77.63. Yeah, it's 2.9%. I still don't think that's the end of the world. I suppose, if I had other stock funds that could fill up my taxable account, I'd probably prefer it, like a total US stock market that isn't tilted towards dividends. But I wouldn't necessarily exclude this from a taxable account. The thing you got to factor in, though, is that in a retirement account, your money can continue to work for you. You got to pay taxes on this. Let's say whether it's, put aside the actual amount, but you got to pay taxes each year. In a retirement account, you don't. So the money can keep working for you. Now, eventually, as you pointed out, it's going to come out, you're going to pay ordinary income tax, but that could be 20 or 30 or 40 years from now. So it's not just a matter of comparing 15 and 22, right? And of course, you don't know what your taxes are going to be. Well, I don't know how old you are, but assuming if it's going to be years before it comes out, you don't know what your taxes are going to be. You don't know what the tax laws are going to be. You might not even know where you're going to live. Maybe you do. Are you married or not? There's all these issues. It kind of goes back to the whole Roth conversion issue. It's really difficult to figure out what your taxes are going to be 20 or 30 or 40 years from now. But, as long as the dividend isn't crazy, if you get into the 3, 4, 5 plus yields, I wouldn't put AT&T stock in a taxable account. Of course, their dividend's going to get cut. Anyway, I don't know how helpful that was, Carlos, and I'm sorry if it wasn't. I'll try to do better. Larry Wallace Lane. Does it ever concern you that Apple is 7% now of the S&P 500? Sorry, I'm parched. Top 10 companies, almost 30% of the S&P weight. Is that historically abnormal? Well, it's historically high, for sure. And I saw a website somewhere, S&P 500 top 10 by year. Let's see if we can find it. No, that's not it. I've seen it around 20%, 25%. But it doesn't concern me. If you mean concern me for the S&P 500, it's going to fluctuate. It's going to change. It'll come back down. And I own Apple stock. So I own Apple stock directly. I own it through Total Stock Market. I own it through Berkshire Hathaway. But it is the stock I give away to charity. So we reduce our holdings that way. Well, here we go. What's this? Maybe this is it. Oh, here we go. If we can, I'll turn off the annoying music. So this doesn't show you percentages, but it's interesting. So we're in 1981. Look, AT&T was up there, IBM. Where's Apple? Of course, Apple's not on there anywhere, right? Microsoft, Amazon. Of course, this is, pre-internet. So yeah, things change. But no, it doesn't concern me. I mean, just long term, these things work themselves out. Companies come and go. It's just, things fluctuate. That's what they do. I'll leave that up for now while I go to the next question, because it's really, I find it kind of pleasing. Can you hear the music? Maybe I should turn it back on. Yeah, maybe not. Okay. GG, if I do a backdoor Roth conversion, is there a minimum time duration where I must keep the funds in the traditional IRA, or can I convert immediately? Great question. I'll tell you what I believe to be true, but understand I'm not a tax expert. I believe that at one time there was a concern. Can you convert right away? And some suggested, no, maybe you should hold off because the IRS doesn't like you doing things purely for a tax reason, which I think is kind of interesting. But then I'm pretty sure the IRS came out and said, no, you can convert right away. That's what I believe, GG. But again, I would talk to whoever your broker. They'll be able to confirm that. How are we doing here? We're in 2000. This really needs to speed up. But Microsoft's up there. Where's Apple? No, has Apple been invented? I think they have, but weren't they almost bankrupt then? 2007. Maybe that's when we see them really show up, because that's when the iPhone comes out. I don't know. Okay, next question. Do you have a pension? That's from Holly. I don't know, Holly. Why are you asking? I do not. Would love to hear, Patrick, would love to hear your thoughts on financial anxiety. Oh, I think I answered that one probably with more detail, and I'll probably regret that later. Okay. Linoina, I don't know how to pronounce it. I just started a Roth IRA. Congratulations. Good for you. Which funds to choose? And there's two. Well, I'm sorry. We've got to change the video now. All right. Let's see. By the way, Apple's now in the lead. It's 2013. I think they pretty much stay in the lead. That's not true, but for the most part it is. SNXFX, Schwab 1000 index. All right. SWPPX. So the SWPPX is an S&P 500. SNXFX, the 1000 index. That just I guess the 1000 largest companies. I'm going to guess there's very little difference between these two. It seems like there would be, right? 1000 companies versus 500. But I'll just show you this here in a minute, and the answer will be it probably doesn't matter much. Let me pull up the S&P 500 and show you what I'm looking at. I want to look at it in Morningstar. So here's the Schwab 1000. It's a large blend fund, and we can look at its top holdings just to get. It's got just under 1,000 holdings. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. We've seen this list before. The S&P 500 is also a large blend. The dot is slightly higher than the 1000, right? Because it's the 500 largest, not the 1000. And when we go to the top 10, which represents 29% of this fund, it's the same companies, just with slightly more allocation. Apple's 6.78 versus 605. The top 10 is 26%. So these are going to perform in a very similar way. And we can actually model that. I don't know how long these funds have been around, but let's put them in and see. Maybe not long at all. Oh, no, from 1998. Oh, that's a lot of data. That's good. So what do we think? Which one outperformed? I'm going to guess the S&P 500, which would be SWPPX. But what do I know? And I would be wrong. Not by much, though. So there you go. Yeah, you can see they're neck and neck. Yeah. But congrats on your first Roth IRA. Assam says, Assam has an extra 100 grand. I don't know what. That's a nice problem to have. Is it in cash, stacked there, or what? Anyway, they want to know whether they should put it in SCHD, which is the Schwab fund that we looked at. By the way, my answer is going to be, I don't know. I can tell you my views on these two funds. VDELX. Oh, well, they're totally different, right? So this, We just looked at this. I wish I would remember mutual fund tickers better. This is Wellington. So Wellington is a balanced fund, 60-40 stocks, bonds. Obviously, SCHD is a 100% stock portfolio. So, it depends on your investment time horizon and your goals and your risk tolerance. You would expect over the long term SCHD to outperform, but with more volatility. And in the short term, Wellington could outperform. But yeah, it's really like comparing apples to oranges. Hope that makes sense. I mean, they're both good funds for different purposes. All right. Ailman says, I always wondered why the S&P 500 is considered a blend. It's just the 500 biggest companies, so it doesn't have to be 50-50 value growth. And it's not 50-50, actually, right? At least if you use Morningstar, let's look at, we'll just use SPY. But I will tell you, the index is constructed, and so it's not actually the 500 largest companies. It's 500 of the largest companies. So it's not just, let's take the 500 that have the largest market cap. And you can see it looks like it's slightly tilted towards growth. Yeah, you can see in the numbers, at least at the large cap level. But I think it's again, I'm not an expert on how S&P came to construct this index, but I believe it's by design, it's a blend. And I could be wrong, but it's always in the blend category. But yeah, it can move. You can see it's a little bit towards growth right now. Tyler wants to know where Salty is. I don't know. I might have Salty's email. I could reach out to him. I think I do. I'll have to look later. I don't know. Hope I haven't offended him. Okay. Yes, please tag me if you want me to address a question, because I skip everything else. Good question from Ryan. Thoughts on how to prioritize meeting your asset allocation targets versus tax efficiency of fund placement? Example, I want 10% in REITs across accounts, but can only get to 12% in 401k IRA. Well, so I'm never putting REITs in a taxable account. That's just my rule. And if that meant, for example, that I couldn't own REITs, I wouldn't own REITs. But I guess I don't understand the math, because if you've got 12% in a 401, maybe you're saying it's 12% of those accounts, but it's not 12% overall, and you want to get to 10%. Yeah, it can be tricky, and you might not be able to get to exactly what you want, and it's just a trade-off, and you're going to have to decide what's most important for you. But I don't have a problem with having, say, an IRA over here that's nothing but REIT. I mean, because what I'm worried about is, or what I focus on is the asset allocation overall for all the accounts. So I don't know if that helps you, but I don't have a problem. And sometimes what I've done in the past is if I have a small account relative to the others, whatever that might be for you, let's say it's in, I don't know, an HSA or an inherited IRA or whatever, or just an IRA you've started, there's not much in it. Sometimes I'll just throw it into like some sort of balanced fund, target date fund, and just ignore it. I don't even, yeah, it's a way just to exclude it from the rest of the allocation. It's like, oh, I don't have to deal with that. It's over here. But I have no problem with having one account that's nothing but one fund that by itself would not be diversified at all. But when you then add in all the other accounts, they are. I don't know if that helps. That's been my approach. How about discussing a balanced ETF? This is Mela, I don't know. We've looked at this one before, AOK. This is, I'll bring it up. They have several, right? This is just one of them. This is the conservative allocation. This is an iShares. So this is an ETF. It's not a target date fund, but it's a balanced fund. This would be like similar to Vanguard's life strategy funds. And if we go to performance, let's check out their distributions. Yeah, no capital gains. So this would be a tax efficient way to get a balanced fund. Look at this. They did have some cap gains back in 2017. Huh. I don't know what that's about. But this one's conservative. So what's this, 100 or 80% fixed income? Oh, no, 65. Okay. And the rest in U.S. and non-U.S. equities. So again, like a life strategy fund. I mean, they have others. So let's see. Is AOA the aggressive? Yeah. So the portfolio here is, yeah, 80-20. Perfectly reasonable fund. If 80-20 works for you and you don't, you know, and this US, non-US allocation is to your liking, you can look at the bond allocation, the effective duration, types of bonds, basically a total bond kind of fund. Some high yield, but not much. I mean, I like those funds. I've never owned them, but I'll say I never will. Mr. Dan, hi from Southern California. Any suggestions on how to stop the urge to mess with my portfolio? I love simplicity and have 90% in an 80-23 fund and 10% in SCV, small cap value, but always think about changing. Help, LOL. Yeah, I don't think you can stop the urge, but you don't have to give in to it. That just seems so profound. Pretty stupid. I don't know. I think, well, I mean, some would say don't check the portfolio every day. And for some that helps, that's fine. So, I mean, you know, you don't have to check it at all, really. I mean, once a year. But if you're listening to this show, you probably are checking your portfolio more than once a year. So that's, you know, I over time, you just see, you know, you think you know what's going to happen and then something else happens. And over time, at least my experience has been that when that happens enough, you realize touching your portfolio doesn't make any sense just because the market's been up or down or whatever. It just changes. But yeah, maybe the best way is just not to look for a while, even if it's for a few days. DC girl from my neck of the woods. Well, assuming that DC stands for the District of Columbia, I guess it could stand for something else. So excited to catch your live show. Well, welcome. I'm a new investor and I'm loving your content. I'm still building my portfolio, but it's great. Question: should I repay my TSP loan or invest the money? Well, so that tells me you don't need the money for something, if those are your two choices. I personally would repay the loan. You know, if you leave the job, you assume you're a government worker, you could end up having to pay it back or it's deemed a distribution. I don't generally like to borrow to invest. So why I can't, of course, can't tell you what to do. That's going to be up to you. I personally would pay back the 401k loan. That's what I would do. Anita says Hood, which is Robinhood, allows me to use margin, but I'm not too sure what to use it for, if at all. Margin calls don't sound fun. They're not, and I wouldn't use it at all. I've never borrowed on margin. I've never invested on margin. Wouldn't do it. So Travis says, our current allocation is, how we doing on time? Okay. Our current allocation is 52% US stocks, 27% international, 21% bonds. Half of net worth is in real estate. They own apartments. Would you adjust stock bond allocation? Well, I don't know. How's that for an answer? I might. Depends, you know, so half of your net worth is in apartment buildings. You know, how much are you leveraged? What's your cash flow? How much risk is involved? I certainly would want to have enough in cash or fixed income that I could deal with issues for at least a couple of years. I don't know what that would look like for you. So it's possible that I would change my asset allocation, potentially. Because if you think about an apartment building as an equity, as part of, you know, because you're an owner. Now, half your net worth, again, I don't know what your leverage is on the apartments, but really you could argue you've got about 10% in bonds. right? If you view the apartments as like a giant REIT, let's just say, not what it is, but even that wouldn't move me. I would be very concerned when I owned real estate. I wanted to be able to manage and be able to deal. I thought, what if all tenants stopped paying, which is kind of, I guess anything could happen. Well, COVID, right? I suppose it's possible, but how long could I pay the mortgage? And for me, it had to be years. Now, an apartment building, that may not be possible. It's a big time investment. My watch tells me it's time to stand. But I can definitely say that if I own apartment buildings, it would influence my stock bond allocation. But exactly how would depend on all kinds of factors. But the basic idea would be I would not want to get caught over leveraged and unable to meet my obligations. Because a lot of times everything goes down at the same time, right? Your stocks and your apartment buildings can go down the hopper. We hit a recession. Tenants can't pay. I mean, it can all go down at one time. So I would ask myself, if that happened, if I don't know, I would stress test things. I'd say, well, what if my stocks are down 50% and I don't know, 30% of my tenants stop paying? Let's just make up a number, some bad number. Would you be able to survive for a year or two? That's the kind of way I would think about it. See, it's that anxiety coming back from childhood. All right. Oops, man, there's tons of questions. I'm not going to get to them. I'm sorry. I'm doing 2 of these a week now. I'm doing the best I can. Anyway, let's see. Well, I kind of answered this one, Grant. What are your thoughts on long-term impact of taxes on foreign dividends for international stocks? I mean, again, if they're taxed as ordinary income, that's an issue. In a taxable account, I'd avoid it if I could. The other thing about a taxable account, I alluded to this, but whether you're doing it yourself, you have an advisor. I have a lot of people with advisors. Their advisors put them into these expensive investments, and it's been a number of years. They've got these unrealized gains, and they feel stuck now. So you've got to be really careful what you invest in a taxable account, because you're either going to feel stuck or you're going to end up paying a lot of taxes. I mean, someday you'll pay taxes if you pull it out to live on. That's that we all understand that. That's just part of the deal. But to pull it out because you want to change things around and get hit with a lot of taxes, that's not good. And then getting hit with dividends that are taxed as ordinary income every year, that's not good either. Well, Kyle talks about he uses covered call ETFs to reinvest the dividends, but he hopes to live off of it for like 30 years. Here's the problem. And I've seen this over and again. They'll say, look, some covered call ETFs earning 8% or has an 8% yield. Well, I mean, we talk about living off 4%. This is 8%. The problem is the 8% doesn't help you if the value of the fund goes down. I mean, it helps you, but it's not like the next year you might still get 8%, but it's going to be 8% of a smaller amount, right? These funds don't generate 8% plus grow like an FTSAX. They don't do that. How could they? They're paying out 8%, right? So, you're not keeping up with inflation. And some would say, well, I won't spend the 8%. I'll only spend 4% and I'll reinvest the 8%. But again, if the value of the fund is going down, you really have to look at total return, not just the income. At least that's my view. Peter says, thoughts on bonds. Yeah, I did a couple videos. If you just go to the channel and search, I mean, I think they're an important part of a portfolio. I recognize they're expensive and yields are low. But I really think most people should have at least some amount of bonds. That's certainly true when you're old like me and you're moving into retirement. Vinyl says, what if index funds start performing poorly relative to other investments? Well, particularly in a down market, that can happen. Long term, it just hasn't happened. I don't know. If we start to see 20-year performance numbers, I mean, right now at a 10-year mark, U.S. large cap active managed funds, 80+% of them underperform. let's say we got to 50-50, which would be extraordinary for active management. On an after-fee basis, 50% beat the S&P 500 for a 10 or 15-year period. But even then, it's a 50-50 shot. You pick the right fund. So I don't know. My money's still in index funds. Paul says, I've inherited an IRA, which I take RMD, required minimum distribution, under the old rules. I want to transfer it to a new investment. I don't know what those initials mean. With lower costs. Any pitfalls in transferring? I don't think so. I transferred my inherited IRA just a few weeks ago. Did it online. You know, it's just like transferring an IRA. Well, it is an IRA. So I didn't have any issues. It went smoothly. I logged into the broker I wanted to transfer it to and could do it all online. You could call them, you know, talk to, they all have all the, if you're going with a major broker, they all have departments. They'd love to help you, you know, transfer your money to them. They'll help you. But yeah, I didn't have any issues. So Clayton's, we kind of alluded to this. What do you think about investing in stocks bought and sold by highly successful value investors by tracking the 13F filings? That's where we were looking at Dataroma earlier. And I think looking at what they own is a good way to get ideas. And that's it. Keep in mind, it's not just the investment, but it's what they paid for it. So they could have owned it for a long time or got it at a better price. And you also don't know if they're short something, you know, so you don't know their entire portfolio. And of course, sometimes they're just wrong, including the great Warren Buffett. So, but I think it's a great way to get ideas. I really like the value investors that, you know, have whatever, billions of dollars in like 6 or 10 investments, and they're out there. Trying to think if I can think of one. Probably not. Guy Spears in here. I got a holiday card from him. It was the coolest card. I interviewed him years ago. Nicest guy. So here's an example. Here's his fund. Aquamarine. So he has a $200 million portfolio in what? A dozen stocks? 13. These are the percentages. He's got Alibaba. Anyway, yeah, I think it's a great way to get ideas. So Michael says, I got burned with Vanguard's target date fund capital gains this year in a taxable account. Sorry to hear that. Trying to keep a balanced approach even in that account. Any advice? Well, it's an interesting question because, you know, if you're going to pay a lot of taxes to move it out of there, one could argue that as bad as last year was, it was for a specific issue, and they're going to actually, I've heard they're going to combine those share classes now. They're going to actually lower the fees. So maybe capital gains won't be as bad going forward. That was sort of a one-off event. And as bad as it was, if you've got still got a lot of unrealized gains, selling may not be ideal. But Michael, I can't, obviously, we're all just guessing at this point. I don't know that I would sell right away. If I had a lot of unrealized gains still in that fund, I don't own it in a taxable account, but I might hang on rather than incurring the additional capital gains. Because one thought is, if I sell, I'm obviously bringing all the capital gains into 1 year. If I get hit with another capital gain like what happened, at least it's not all the capital gains, you know, that I would trigger if I sold everything. So I'm not, yeah, I mean, you might kind of wait and see. I don't know. But again, I'm not predicting the future. What do I know? Just a guy with a YouTube channel. By the way, and this is important, my tactical rating on chess.com went over 3,000. I'm very proud of that. It took me forever. I don't know what it really means. I sent out something on Twitter. No one replied. It was very sad. John from Singapore. I always wanted to go to Singapore. I have a book on Singapore, which I'm looking forward to reading. It's history. For passive income, would you rather buy a few dividend growth stocks You give some examples: Apple, Bank of America, or buy index ETFs like an S&P 500. Well, so I don't think about it like that, John, in terms of dividend stocks. I mean, or dividend growth. I think total return. So, between individual stocks and say an ETF, they're night and day. I mean, ETF is simple. S&P 500 or total stock market. You're diversified immediately. It's low cost. That's what I would recommend for the vast majority of people. And that's what we have the majority of our assets in, not necessarily those specific funds, but low cost index funds. Starting to invest in individual stocks takes a lot of work, a lot of research. Frankly, I don't give it enough time. For the four, I don't even own 4 stocks. So I think the best approach is to have at least the majority of your money. This is my approach, I should say, in low cost index funds. If you want to put 5 or 10%, mine's grown a little bit, but in individual stocks, that's fine. But I think most people will end up better off if they just get a simple low cost index fund approach and stick to it. That's my opinion. Oh, here we go. Ryan, Team X at a negative 4.5 means that if you bet on them, you win if they win the game by 5 or more points. So so the negative would be the favored team because they got to win by 5, not just win, right? I don't know where that tab was, but I think that means the Rams are favored. I don't know. It's so confusing. Oh, Anita says 2x Dalio all-weather portfolio leveraged. Yeah. Again, it's like the golfer with all of the gadgets on, and the hat with the thing, tied down so they can't lift their head. I don't know. I can't say in the right set of circumstances that wouldn't turn out, although the all-weather portfolio has a lot of gold and long-term bonds. That's just not my approach. Plus, to lever it, yeah, that's just not my approach to building wealth. Marcus. Oh, it's 9:02. This will be the last question. Sorry I didn't get to everything. But we'll do this again Thursday morning at 11 a.m. All right. With the recent tax consequences of the target date fund at Vanguard, should we do ETFs and taxable accounts versus mutual funds? So, as you know, I've sort of favored mutual funds in the past. Now, I've never gotten burned. All of the mutual funds I own, they haven't distributed capital gains. But in light of what's happened, I'm probably now swinging back to just saying, ETFs probably the safe thing to do from a tax perspective. And you can convert some Vanguard funds to ETFs. I haven't done that yet. I don't do anything like that quickly. I think about it, I mull it over, play some chess, make a protein shake, try to do some pull-ups. I can't do as many. I don't know. It's the right shoulders. I've been working on it. Anyway, I think about it. Right? I don't just go out and make these quick changes, but I'll likely convert them to ETFs. Again, I gotta believe like a VTSAX or VFIAX, these funds from Vanguard, I don't think they're going to have the same problem that the target date retirement fund had. But I guess the thought is, why risk it, right? Just go with the ETF. That's kind of where I am now. So yeah, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I should have learned. That's sort of my view. So there you go. I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions, but I'm thrilled that you guys are, spent a couple of hours hanging out with me. And I'll be back at it Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. I don't know how regularly I'll do these Monday night shows. My wife has been very accommodating the last 2 weeks. She's nice that way. And she can probably hear me through the wall. So, honey, you're lovely. Anyway. But yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll continue to do this Monday night session on a fairly regular basis. Remember, all these are my opinions. I'm not a financial advisor. I've made my own share of mistakes. Hopefully it helps you, but you got to do your own research. If you want, professional advice, hire, I think, someone that you can pay by the hour or a flat fee. That's usually the best in my view. But there you go. Have a great night. Like I said, I will have Timestamps up here, should be by midday tomorrow. And that's it. Well, thanks for joining me. Have a great week. And until next time, remember, best thing money can buy is financial freedom.